Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years, and our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
Talked about these triggers come in. What happens to a trigger if you don't deal with it? Grows, and then you get multiple triggers, and then what happens? You end up at this place called the pit, right? What's the pit? A very dark place, right? Dark place where ultimately it's very hard to get out of, and every little thing that happens to you sucks and makes it worse. And so you feel like things are a lot worse than they are, right? You with me? And so the part here is understanding that this is what brings the pain from us, is not dealing with and processing our stuff. And so that's just something that's important there with that. Now, what comes from triggers? Feelings. So in the Super Bowl example, what do people get? Angry, right? About some shit on TV that they can't control.
I'm so sorry.
And so,
I'm so out of the loop. What still happened?
so it doesn't matter. There's a halftime show, people are angry about certain things, and then people got angry about people being angry.
There's like booty
Right.
popping, they're going to strip a mall.
There is on a stripper pole with kids in cages wearing like a, there's, if you look at it, there's kids in cages. There's literally, there's kids in cages. So
If they're butt naked, how's it going to change your life?
right. So point being, there's people being triggered about being triggered, right? And so the reality is what happened. People look at what it is, and they have these feelings about it. And so there's two ways you go. One, you be detached, which means you can't be productive and feel things, right? Which most people do that. They just get detached, but that's not the way to do it, right? That's just more of what we talked about, a false lift. If you're detached from everything, you're not going to have influence on anybody, right? I want to be able to feel and influence people. And so that's why I look at what happens. People take the feelings, and what do? They believe their facts. So on both sides of this equation, right? Some say it's right, some say it's wrong. Some say this is whatever. There's a million different things I've seen about it. But ultimately, what do you have? You have people create what?
Story.
A story. You watch all that shit. Go back and look at your feed. It's literally all the same bunch of what? Stories. And neither one of them are right. You know why? Because it doesn't matter. Right? Ultimately, because it's gone. But what matters is how you control your own triggers and what the weight is that you're carrying in your head. And the reality is, like I said last week, what do people have? They have a lot of shit that they can't affect that's owning real estate in their head 3 days later. 2 days later, whatever it is, right?
There's still people like every day, like their stories, like posting about Kobe, like, you know,
Yep.
tributes. And I'm just like, that was not to be, harsh, but like that was like a week ago. You're still like every day.
And we predicted that was what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so part of it's understanding that that's why it's so important as well. So what do we do when we get to the story?
Ask if it's 100% true.
Right? Is that story 100% true? So look at the example. What tells me? J-Lo and Shakira should not have done that on Super Bowl. Is that 100% true? No, right? Here's the crazy part. Should J-Lo and Shakira should have done it on the thing. Is that 100% true? No, right? So there's no real answer that matters. This is a great example for you guys to understand this process, right? There's no true 100% yes. So what really matters? Doesn't get what I want. And this is a question that no one's asking right now that's in the masses of people, right? So, right, does this story of what happens give me what I want? No, because neither story is going to get you what you want. So the best thing you can do is get a new story, right? What would be an example of that?
Talk about something else.
For me, doesn't really matter what they did on the Super Bowl because it does not get me paid. What matters is what I focus on is what I can control. That's a much better story. What's that do? It gives me two things, an eye of hope and an eye of power. How much more powerful would these people be if they had an outlook on life of like, dude, doesn't matter what they do on TV. What matters is what I do on my own TV, on my own life. And so the difference is, once they go through that process, you can process any trigger of what you do, and you're able to make sure you have it. But here's the crazy aha for you guys, sorry about that, is this part. There is no true yes or no. And in most of the times in life, there won't be a true yes or no.
Well, it's down to what you want.
And really what I want to do is exposes your own belief that you think this is a fact. Right? So we're sure this is a fact. She never should have done that, right? Or she definitely should have done that. That's amazing for women, or whatever the story is, right? So the thing is, it doesn't matter. And so that's the point, because what do I care about? I don't want it carrying the weight in my head. And so this is the thing that you guys, once you're really good at, allows you to do. And this is not about the Super Bowl. This is about the your clients say to you, the stuff that your clients do to you, the stuff that other agents do to you, right? That's how you become very fast at processing these things. But the one thing I'll make sure you get, and that's why I wanted you guys to kind of cover that, is process means I deal with.
Yeah.
Right? It's gone, it's in the bucket, I've already dealt with that, now I'm on to my next one. And that's how you get up every single day. But how many people carry weight, right? With that happened last week, 2 days. On the way here this morning, I saw on Facebook my buddies who does pretty good in real estate post about February 4th being the most terrible day because his grandma died on this day years and years ago. I'm about big, bro, quit living in the past, right? The story what's his story? February 4th is the absolute worst day of the year. Is that really true? No, dude, you're talking about her grandma. He had a picture of grandma, she was like 100, right? So the reality was, like, this is true. And so what happens? But that story he has is ruining his life.
Yeah.
Right? Is February 4th really the absolute worst day? No, but that's a story he had, which is eating up his capacity in his head.
He needs to do something else. He needs to turn it into like getting pancakes all day and
Right, well, how about celebrating her life, right?
Celebrating
Yeah, so that's one thing that,
Probably my favorite day.
Grandma wanted to have like the best day ever. Like,
Right, and so we're in life, right? Are we not processing these things that we have? And so we talked about the last thing is the faster you process, the faster you move. Everybody understands that, right?
I think, real quick though on that, because I experienced it this week, I have to be really clear on what's detachment and what's processing.
Right.
Because, for me, like with the Kobe thing, I mean, I looked at it and I got a little teary at first, but then I was kind of, I don't think that really triggers me, but other things that happen in my family.
Absolutely,
I mean, like, because there's always so much going on that it's kind of like, all right, easy to put, but then, a lot of times, I'll just react. And so I haven't processed it. So that's important for me to be able to recognize the difference between when I'm actually processing something or just detaching and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it builds up.
And for you, what happens, it's a natural thing that happens, is what you're really doing is deflecting it. So, and here's a problem.
I feel like I'm a goal. I was a goalie and I think I'm still living.
Yeah, and the problem is, but it never goes away, right? So the problem with this goalie is the ball never leaves the field. And so if we don't deal with those ball is still going to be there to be hit at me, right, over and over. And that's kind of what makes the biggest difference. Same thing that we learned before. So when I sedate my problems, so I have a really bad day, have things go sideways, I go drinking, right? Feels really good for 3 hours. Wake up the next day, what do I got?
Even worse.
Minus a hangover, I got the same, right? That's not dealt with yet. And so that's the process of numbing. And so, and you're going to be in that situation we said, this is something, so part of what you got to do is figure out what haven't I processed yet, and have to face myself to process it. Because it's hard, because the problem when you go through some traumatic like that, like multiple times, what happens, you get almost a PTSD, right? You get like paranoid. I got that when I was fighting like the LLR and fighting all these things for 3 years straight on that one thing that I already had won that before, right? I got it where I dreaded every email, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, every phone call, any 803 number call me, I'm like, oh God, here we go, you know what I'm saying? So the reality is what you got to make sure you deal with whatever you process, because that's going to come back and hurt you later on because you're carrying that weight. So maybe something small, but you haven't processed a lot of the three. It's always a light one, right? We talked about that's the straw that breaks the camel's back that makes us have this reaction. Then what most people do in your situation is they shut down. And that's bad, because then you can't make the tough decisions that could potentially bring the outcome that you want, right? You see having a business, people get overwhelmed in business, they just shut down, right? And what happens, it just piles up till it kills them, like the business wise, right? And so that's the one thing that you see. And that's why the stack happens really helpful for me, because they ask me one question, what's the one thing you need to do? I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to do this today. And I'm like, shit, I don't really want to do that, but it forces me to pick my one thing I'm going to do so I can move forward, right?
For what you want.
Yep, and so the key about the new story is you got to move forward somewhere. And you're right, but here's the thing. You become numb when you experience a lot of shit, what you got going on. And so you got to be willing to not just detach from it, because if you detach, it's still going to be there.
That's like the out of sight, out of mind thing, where you're like, oh, I'm detached, it's out of sight, out of mind, dealt with it, but you really didn't. Versus processing is more of a step-by-step, like a series of questions and conclusions.
Yep.
I feel like.
It's just true in the business. How many people put their head in the sand, right? You've all dealt with people that have done that as sellers, as buyers. They didn't deal with things, right? Whatever it is. They had something on their credit from 4 years ago they still haven't dealt with, or 3 years ago. It's holding them back from buying a house. If they just face it and dealt with it, they could already buy a house now. But what do we do now? We all do this, man. Like, we all do that. And so ultimately that's kind of what happens, is we only want to focus on the good, sexy stuff. And the problem is that we don't actually deal with it. So it's constantly there. And like I said a million times, you always end up paying with interest once you finally get to it, right? And so that's the one thing I learned in business and anything. If if you don't deal with something, you're going to pay the price to pay the piper at some point, but you're going to pay it on your terms, or you're going to pay it on their terms. When you pay it their terms, it's way more expensive, right? And so that's one thing so use that diagram, and anything y'all go through that happened, right? You can question that story and go through this processing, and there's not going to necessarily be an easy answer. Like in your situation, it's not going to be an easy answer, but you can make the best decision you can at that time based on what it is.
Here's the thing though too, is when you actually identify like a certain thing and you act on it, like something that you've been putting off or whatever, for me, there's a lightning there. So it's almost, it gives you like that eye of power or an eye of hope when you actually complete something that you've been suppressing or detaching from.
Right.
It gives you that power to then gain a momentum towards the next.
Yeah, you just got to get good. At that point, especially you got a lot of
speed.
You're hitting the alligators. What's that thing called when you hit the alligators? You know what I'm talking about? Huh? Whack-a-mole, right? Yeah, you got that, right?
And so, always popping up.
So that's the thing, but you got to have the momentum to do so, right? And part of that, you know what? That's the story that you're driving because now you feel accomplished because you knocked that thing out, right? And so how do we get you to have that story earlier to knock them out faster? So you're not carrying that weight. But like we mentioned, the problem with this is most people are 1 degree off of the pit, right? One thing happens, it stacks on, all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, and they lash out at people they love. They do whatever in reactionary mode instead of understanding how they can do that before, you know? And that's one thing that's important. And Garrett asked me how to call one-on-one with Garrett, I don't know, a week or two ago, and he was just talking about what's different from you now in 2015. I was like, dude, I was so angry back then. And I didn't even know why I was angry. But what it was is I hadn't processed all my pain. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I hadn't processed all the things I had going on, the shit I deal with, the times you get screwed over. But as you process these things, right? I didn't have this really outlook, but it's over the years you learn to process and face them. All that stuff kind of goes away and I can see clearer now. And so part of what you do in this is just wipe your eyes away from the emotion that you have, that are the feelings in your stories. But watch people around you, dude. They'll be so passionate about some shit that's not even true, right? Which is scary. But as you're able to see that, you can truly understand where it comes from, right? That's why I had two people that totally have two different stories. They think they're right, and you know both of them aren't even close to being the same thing. Like Democrats, Republicans, right? Just crazy. I can't really resonate or relate to any Democrat, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. But part of that's understanding that they have this deep, ingrained belief based on what they have. That's attached to feelings that they believe is fact. And so, what's the story here? And so, here's the deal: you can argue with those people or be triggered about it, but if it doesn't get you what you want, it doesn't matter. And so, this is the key question. And then you got to get really good at creating a new story. Right? I immediately create a story on the Super Bowl thing. Now I don't really give a shit who's doing what because it doesn't affect me. What affects me is me.